There's an unsung hero in equipment in PRS shooting, and today we're going to talk about it. Hi everyone, it's the Four-Gun Guy. And you know, I've been thinking a lot about triggers, and I don't know why, but I've made some changes to the triggers I've used, the types of triggers I'm using, and I thought, you know, this might be a good time to talk about this because there's a lot of information out there and a lot of people are using different things. So what I wanted to talk to you about today was, let's go over the general, just what is a trigger, right? What are the components of it? How does it work? The differences between a single stage trigger and a two-stage trigger. Why I went to the triggers that I've gone to, not trying to sell you on anything. You need to make your own decisions and do your own research. And then we'll have some final thoughts. So if you're ready to go, let's get to it. Let's talk in general about the functionality of the trigger. Now, in this conversation today, I'm not going to be getting into the triggers I use in my AR, in my pistols, in my shotguns, any of those. We're talking PRS here, so we're really going to be talking more about bolt guns. And I do have an AR-10 platform, that Bix'n's SP-10 that I've done a couple reviews on. I'm going to talk about the trigger in that as well. But look, let's talk about some definitions and how those definitions work through the process of the trigger, okay, in use. So I'm going to put this up on the screen. The first thing we're going to talk about is the take-up of a trigger. So when you get your trigger in your rifle, if it's a single stage, it's going to be different than a two-stage, but there is generally some form of take-up. Your finger touches the trigger, and you can feel a little movement there, right? A little movement there. That's the take-up. It's going to depend on how much take-up there is, if it's a single stage or a two-stage trigger, but let's just talk about take-up first. Take-up ends at the wall. So you're going to reach a point in your trigger pull that you're going to feel it, right? It's right there. And in your mind, you know that if you add more pressure, more weight with your finger, the trigger's going to break. So that wall could have a little bit of what's called creep in it. It could be that as you pull that trigger past the wall, there's still a little bit of creep in the internals of that trigger before it's going to release, or we're getting into the break, right? There could be. The goal of trigger manufacturers is for there not to be any creep or as minimal creep as possible, right? We don't want that. We want it to where when you're ready, the trigger's ready, right? Now, the creep will end at the break. The break is the beginning of the hammer release, which will result in, we're going to get there in a second, but the break comes, the hammer releases, the firing pin moves forward, impacts the primer, the primer ignites the powder in the case, sends the bullet down the barrel, and you get an impact, hopefully, right? After that break and the firing, you're going to have some over travel in that trigger, right? And if you are concentrating properly on your trigger pull technique, you won't do what I do sometimes. In fact, I did it this last match, and one of my teammates called me out on it. I missed the very first shot in a 500-yard shot on a fairly decent-sized target, about the size of this iPad here. And when I came off the line, I said, God, I just don't know how I missed that target. And he said, you slapped the trigger. He said, I watched it. You slapped. He said, the rest of your trigger pulls were fine, but that first one, you slapped it. So basically what I did was, I didn't follow the process of bringing it back, feeling it, knowing I'm at the wall, feeling the break, and then traveling through the break and bringing my finger back, right? You want to do that. But again, this isn't a video on proper trigger technique. It's just on triggers. So when we get to the over travel, we're going to bring that trigger back. I bring it back until it stops, and then I'm going to release it, right? And when we start to release that trigger forward, that's when the trigger is going to reset, right? Now, the reset actually happens in, say, my semi-automatic, right? My AR-10 is when it really resets. The reset in my bolt gun is when I run the bolt. But there is a point there that as I release that trigger back up, I'm putting it in a position to reset. So there's some different terminology and different thoughts around that. That's just the way I look at things, right? And then the reset resets the trigger for the follow-on shot. So let's go through this again. I get behind the rifle, my finger's on the trigger, I have some take up, then I hit the wall, then the trigger breaks, I continue back with my finger, right, with the over travel, and then I release or ease off the trigger, and that will allow the trigger to reset one way or another. If it's in my semi-automatic, the trigger is going to reset, right? If it's in my bolt gun, this hand is coming off the trigger anyway to run the bolt, and then that has reset the trigger. So just wanted to go through that with you, just some basics of the trigger functionality. Let's go ahead and talk now about those differences between a single stage and a two-stage trigger. A single stage trigger, there's very little, if any, take up, right? When you put your finger against that trigger, you're ready to fire. It could be a pinch of take up, there could be no take up whatsoever, right? And then when you break the shot, you almost think about firing, right? Your finger's coming back, but you know it's happening, okay? Single stage trigger, that's the way that feels to you. On a two-stage trigger, there is a deliberate take up to a deliberate wall. A single stage, you're at the wall. On a two-stage, you're taking up, you feel it take up, and you feel that trigger stop at the wall. Now I know that when I add that little bit more pressure, I'm there and the shot's gonna break. So that's really the difference between a one and a two-stage trigger at a very high level. There are a lot of adjustments you can make to both those triggers, and depending on what type of trigger you buy, you can adjust all of that, right? How much take up you have in a two-stage trigger, the pull weight on when you're at the wall for the break. So there's a lot of things you can update, but basically that's the difference between a single and a two-stage trigger. I'm going to lump one more thing into this conversation, and that is the type of shoe of the trigger. So when we think about the trigger, like this is my Bix'n trigger in my bolt gun here, and I have what's called a gator shoe, one of their gator shoes in here, and it's very stippled and it's a curved shoe. I have a straight shoe on my AR-15 that I used to use for 3-gun because I just like the feel of that. I've gone back to curved shoes on all my PRS rifles. That just feels good to me, right? It's a personal preference. So now let's move on and look at the trigger brands and kind of what the pros are using today. Let's look at Precision Rifle Blog, and if you've never been there, it's a great resource. I know back in 2019, this helped me a lot in my research, looking at what types of rifles I wanted to look at, scopes I wanted to look at, and all the accessories that go with a rifle. So I want to start off with 2019, because this is going to be interesting. If you look at 2019, right, Trigger Tech just blew the competition away. You can see this just by a mile. Bix'n was second, Jewel Triggers was third, Timney fourth, Huber Concepts, Accuracy International, and so on down the line. But we can see that Trigger Tech really blew the field away. Now let's look at 2024, and I'll bring this up. 2024, Bix'n Andy is catching up to Trigger Tech. Now, there are some reasons for that. I'm not going to go into them now, but if you do some research, you'll probably see some reasons for why Bix'n Andy has kind of caught up with Trigger Tech. Then we still have Timney and Jewel. I'm not sure about Jewel. I've read that they're not making triggers anymore, but I don't know. So you'll have to do your own research there. And you can see some of the others, but really the two big trigger people or manufacturers are Trigger Tech and Bix'n Andy for this type of shooting. But I just wanted to bring this up as the comparison as to what the quote pros are using today and what you might want to look at for your new build, or if you're in the market to replace your trigger or whatever. And again, I'm not recommending any trigger brand or anything. Do your research and see what's gonna work for you. One thing I do want to do in this section for the brands is I do want to talk about cleaning comparisons. So if you run a Trigger Tech trigger, right, and I ran a lot of Trigger Tech diamonds, it's a closed drop-in trigger, right? So it's a drop-in trigger, so it's all in a case. You simply drop it in. You've got the two pins that hold it in place in here, and you're good to go. The thing about a Trigger Tech trigger is you cannot take it apart. Well, I guess you can, but I think it voids a warranty, and if you can get it apart, you're not supposed to. Let's put it that way. So if you're going to clean a trigger like that, and this is off of the Trigger Tech website, so please, in the comments, don't say, don't ever do that. That's not how you're supposed to clean your triggers. Trigger Tech says to clean their triggers, lighter fluid and compressed air. If you use a trigger that can be taken apart, like a Bix'n Andy trigger, which is what I have in these rifles, in the bolt guns anyway, then you can take it apart. And I actually did a video, and there's a couple more from Bix'n Andy on how to clean your TacSport Pro trigger, and I did a video on that as well. I like that because then I can take it apart, I can see how dirty it is, I can clean it the way I know it's clean when I'm done. It's a process, and if you're not careful, you're going to lose some real small pieces, so you've got to be very careful when you do that. But I did want to talk about that difference between cleaning these triggers, you know, depending on what you want to do and how deep you want to get into it. One might be better than the other for you. Or if you just want to say, look, I just want to dump a can of lighter fluid down this thing and take some air to it and clean it that way, more power to you. I think it's great. Please always have a backup, even if it's not the same trigger you're using, right? If it's, you could have a Timney as a backup as long as you've got the pull weight set the same. It could be a cheaper backup trigger, but I would recommend always having a backup trigger in case you're in a match. Your trigger goes down, see it all the time. You need to make a quick change. You can do it. Now, let's talk about why I went to the triggers I've gone to. Well, it's very interesting, my journey, because as you know, I started in 3-gun. So when I built my AR, I built my own AR, and it had a 2-stage trigger in it. And I was just really learning about all this stuff, and I thought, yeah, okay, I'll put this in there. And I used it for about a year or year and a half, and then I went to a single stage because I just liked the fact that for 3-gun, I wanted a faster reset. I didn't need to worry about take up and hitting a wall and then breaking the shot. I need to put 2 shots on this cardboard IPSC, 2 more on that, 2 on that, 2 on that, 2 on that, in very rapid motion. So that's why I went with a single stage. When I had my first bolt gun built for PRS, I went with a single stage, and it was a Trigger Tech Diamond. Loved it. I love Trigger Tech triggers. For a single stage trigger, I just love those things. But then I eventually wanted to try a 2-stage. So, and at that time, Bix'n Andy was coming up. I had some challenges with the trigger tech that I had at practice one day. And so I thought, I'm going to try Bix'n Andy. So I got the Bix'n Andy 2-stage. I love them. I just love those triggers. I don't think you can go wrong with either one of those. I don't. I went with a 2-stage because I like the fact that when I'm behind the rifle, I'm taking my breath, I'm calming down. I want a little take up, and I want to reach the wall on my time. I don't know if that's making sense. I want to reach the wall on my time. When I'm ready, I reach the wall. And then I know that I'm going to break the shot. That's just me. It's different with different people, right? Some people go single and they never look back. And there's nothing wrong with that. It's what's going to work for you. The other thing that I want to talk about is, and let's bring this up really quick as well. Let's talk about pull weight. So I think, if I'm not mistaken, and this was kind of weird, here's the 2019 pull weight from Precision Rifle Blog. And you can see that most people are in the half pound to almost a pound in 2019. When we look at the 2024, kind of was weird here because there's a huge spread here in 2024, but you can see most of them are 12 ounces, and the second most favorite is 8 ounces, and that's where I run my triggers. So I wanted to kind of blend this into my conversation on what I'm doing. So both all three of my triggers are running at 8 ounces, and that is the that's really the total weight. My take up on this one is probably 2, and then there's a 6-ounce break in this bolt gun and my 22. In the Seekins SP10, it's a little heavier. So the take up on that is about 3 ounces, I think, and then I think I do have the second stage set to 8 ounces. So that's about a 10-ounce overall trigger pull. But I just wanted to talk to you about why I went to the 2-stage. It's just more comfortable for me right now at this point in my shooting, and I just feel better when I'm breaking the shot. Final thoughts, just a couple things. Number one, I would definitely get, I'm coming out of camera here, but I would definitely get something like, a trigger pull gauge. This is the Wheeler. I really like this thing. It's electronic. It seems to work fine. Again, I'm not pushing it. I'm just saying something like this to really help you understand where you are and what you're doing. So what's going to work for you? As I said earlier, get with some people, get with your buddies, go out to the range, use each other's equipment, see what's going to work for you. You may be using a single stage trigger right now. You may get behind a 2-stage and go, wow, I really like that. Or man, I don't know how you get a shot off with this thing. It's just going to depend. Trigger pull, look, that's another individual preference, but I'm just going to say this. I like the 8 ounces overall because I want to be safe. Some guys are running 2-ounce triggers. And to me, okay, if you're good with that and you have that under control, I think that's fantastic. That's just a little too light for me. Some people are running, as you saw in that chart, some people apparently are running 2-pound triggers. That's just a little heavy, right? Especially when you're trying to get out there at 800, 900, 1,000 yards. That could impact your trigger pull, right? But anyway, I don't think you can go wrong with the top 2 or 3 brands that are out there today. I like Trigger Tech. I love Bix'n Andy. I like and love Timney. None of those have let me down. The Trigger Tech did a little bit in practice that day, and that's why I just kind of went to something else. I didn't want that happening in a match, but I think still it's a good trigger and a good company. Well, hey, thanks for watching this one, guys. I just was thinking about it and I thought, we never talk about triggers that much. So I hope it helps. Go out and do your research. I appreciate all the likes, the comments, the subscriptions. And I've got some other stuff coming up. The weather's going to get cooler, so I've got some practice videos I want to do. I've had some things sent to me. One of them's a pretty big thing that I'm going to put together and do a video on that. And yeah, I just appreciate it all. And until next time, shoot straight.